Right, morning everybody. We're going to, just before we start streaming, I thought it would be good if we just have a quick round the table just to introduce us, seeing as we've got so many new faces today. So shall I start and then we'll pass around to Ben. So I'm Debbie Simpson, I'm the Chair of Governance and Audit, so welcome to you all.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm Ben Still.
Right, so welcome to Governance and Audit 25th of July. Agenda item 1's apologies for absence.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Falak Hamid, and Councillor Mike Follard is attending as a substitute. We also have Councillor Galton attending this morning from Leicester to Council, but is running 15 minutes late.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, any declarations of interest from anybody? Yes, Councillor Pollard.
Formally for transparency, in anything relating to West Yorkshire Police finances, my son is a response officer with West Yorkshire Police.
Thank you. Any others? No? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 3. This is for exempt items. So officers are recommending that agenda item 12, appendix 7, is excluded from being discussed in public. So what we would do at that item is take questions on everything apart from that agenda item, close the session and discuss it and then reopen again. Are members of the committee happy to accept the officer's recommendation that that's a private matter? Yes? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So can we note that's accepted? Agenda item 4 is minutes of the last meeting held in April. I appreciate many of you here today weren't at that meeting, but those of you who were, have you got any comments or amendments to the minutes? Yes, one.
Chair, Alistair Newell just asked me to note that he was in attendance at the last committee but isn't listed on the attendance.
Thank you. Got that. Okay, so we move on to agenda item 5, and that's to confirm the governance arrangements for this committee. These are actually approved at West Yorkshire Combined Authority annual meeting on the 19th of June, so they're for information. But Ben, did you want to add anything to this item or not? No, okay. Are there any pressing queries or comments on those, bearing in mind that they are for note? No? Okay, thank you. So can we just make note that the Governance Audit Committee has seen that particular item? Thank you. Okay. Agenda item 6 is the annual audit report and opinion, and this considers the effectiveness of the Combined Authorities' governance, risk management and control arrangements. For new members of our committee, there is an explanation in the cover paper about the breadth and scale of the work that's been undertaken to inform the opinion. There's a significant amount of information in the report. So, Bron, did you want to highlight any key points within it?
Thank you, Chair. So, effectively, as you've just pointed out, the cover report sort of sets out all the background. The important bit, and probably the only bit that people are interested in me highlighting, is the actual opinion itself. And this year, the opinion is more adverse than the previous year. In the report and in subsequent papers, we reflect on the fact that the organisation's grown quite significantly over the year. We've got a lot of additional responsibilities. We've got new funding streams, new major projects. And some of the underpinning control frameworks and underpinning governance arrangements are not yet embedded, still need time to actually develop. We think there's a lot of work to be done around understanding of control frameworks in the business. So as an audit function, we're going to focus on a lot of education and awareness raising within the business over the next couple of years. That's all going to come to you in the future in the internal audit strategy, which we're currently developing. So that's one to note. But effectively, the opinion, while saying that it is less than adequate this year, there are only 3 opinion ratings that we use. There's adequate, less than adequate, and inadequate. We do not believe, or I do not believe, it is my opinion, that the whole of the system is inadequate. We don't think that there is an endemic failing across the system, but we do think there are pockets where we really need to strengthen controls and governance. And it's reflected, I think, in the work that's been done, the number of minimal limited assurance reports, etc. But that needs to be reflected against the fact that there are also a number of reasonable assurance reports. So we are absolutely intent on focusing in on the specific areas that need the progress that is going to shore up the foundations, I think, for a continually growing organisation. So other than that, I'm really happy to take questions on any of the content. Very happy to hear opinions and thoughts.
Thanks, Bron. So I think we've got a number of hands going up. So David and then Councillor Pollard. And then Councillor.
Thank you. Thanks, Bron. Just interesting how marginal maybe that opinion of less than adequate was in relation to being inadequate, because looking at the definition, you're talking about a small number of areas of weakness. And then I look at the list on page 31 of 7 reoccurring themes across the directorates. That feels to me pretty comprehensive list and pretty widespread. I just wonder whether, to what degree the decision was a marginal one between less than adequate and inadequate.
I think what I would point out, and those themes are across the audits that we have done. That's not a comprehensive review of the whole system. And I think what we would be very hesitant to do is to say that the whole of the system is inadequate. The themes are actually a really helpful pointer to where people need to be going and where we haven't had specific assurances or other external assurances, to go and make sure that they are just being mindful of that. And that's why we put that into the report this year. It is a new section. We thought that was quite an interesting guide to the business to help them think about what kind of things are coming out. But it is specific to the areas that we've audited. So I think on balance, and I did have a very strong and long internal debate as to exactly where the opinion should land. It's married up as well with the expectation of what the organisation can do to actually fix this. And I am confident that with the will and the support of all of the directors and the leadership team, this is something that we can get a grip on. We can absolutely make sure that we are building the foundations really strongly to take us forward in what presumably will be continuing efforts to deliver more, to do that in a way that is in line with the public sector ethos. So not marginal really. I was quite clear, I think, at the end of the day that less than adequate was the right reflection for where we are. And it does reflect on the fact that actually systems have changed in some very fundamental areas, like our ERP system. That does need work, and that's highlighted, I think, consistently through the report. Does that answer your question, then?
Thank you. Councillor Pollard.
Thank you, Chair. Just to take Mr Merrick's query just a little bit further, page 23, the annual opinion, reasonable expectation that with continued focus and commitment, substantial progress can be achieved in strengthening these frameworks. Any clue as to timeline for that?
Can I be cheeky and suggest that maybe for management to respond to, because I know there is a lot of work going on to look at the kind of management responses to the opinion. I think from my point of view and working with the internal officer boards, etc., there is a lot of time and attention being given to this. I think it's a valid point in terms of, are we doing it quickly enough? I think that is something that we will want to check in with management regularly through the year to make sure that is actually happening. But so I'm confident it can be. It's really a case now of seeing how quickly management do respond and take things forward.
So can we come back to that in terms of the management response, which is the agenda item 9?
Sorry,
Or did you want to come back to that now, Ben?
I'm happy. I don't mind.
So do you want to take it now then, and then yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. So really good questions and really welcome Bron's report. I think the things to say from a management perspective are we take Bron's work and the findings that Bron has concluded really seriously. It does matter to us really considerably what the IA opinion is. I think Bron has set the scene nicely for some of the things that I want to say, though. But I want to start by saying, even though we're on a journey, and even though this organisation is under considerable opportunity and challenge through change, through the devolution programme, through expectations about what combined authorities will do in the future, None of that is any excuse or reason for complacency. And indeed, during times of change, we need to have even more focus on governance, controls and risk to make sure that the organisation is safe during these transformation and change processes. That doesn't mean we get it right all the time, but we definitely strive to achieve that. And what does that mean in terms of the organisation over the last year? We have the mayor was re-elected and returned to office in May 2024. Her manifesto commitments were all about delivering on the things that she had promoted during her first term, and so the organisation was already on a pathway to fundamentally changing what it does, moving away from being an advisory policy strategy organisation to a delivery organisation. And so what we are facing now is the delivery of large-scale programmes, including one of the largest locally delivered transport programmes in the country, in West Yorkshire Mass Transit, the taking into public ownership of the entire bus network over the next 3 to 4 years, and then delivering a host of other programmes, particularly things like housing retrofit, that are significant in their own right. Making sure that we've got the right controls, risk and governance in place during that process has been absolutely critical. But one of the immediate constraints was that in the past years, we've had a single management leadership board through which the vast majority of decisions have been taken over a certain financial scale. And we recognised 2 years ago that was proving a bottleneck for the organisation, and we needed to empower directors, we needed to delegate and devolve controls and decision making through the organisation if we were to have the bandwidth to deliver on the multiple fronts that the future is going to require us to do. And so Bron's report an opinion is written in the context of that fundamental change in governance with the associated change of how we treat risk, internal decision making, relationships with external boards during that time. Yeah, Councillor Galton. So it's in that context of moving to those new arrangements that the Bron's opinion has been reported. So what does that mean? We have attempted in all those areas to strengthen and improve, as you would always expect an organisation to do as it's going through change processes. Satinda's predecessor, Caroline Allen, introduced directorate sign-off assurance frameworks signed off by directors to give directorate level assurance that controls were in place. We have in our transport directorates, we also have an executive director, Simon Warburton, and he oversees those assurance frameworks as well. So significant steps have been taken. Significant effort has gone into in the planning stage for some of our biggest projects, particularly mass transit, to look at how we're dealing with the project controls and with risk systems within that project framework. There's then the challenge of how we translate that into the corporate risk reporting and controls and decision making. But we've certainly been alive to that and trying to get that right. This is also the time for me to say, this is not an excuse by any means, but it's just a recognition that the combined authority is one of the few parts of local government that's been expanding. That in itself brings challenges, but the directors team in particular has grown and has changed, and I only now have one director that has been within the organisation for more than 3 years. So I have a new and young directorate team, several of whom come from outside the local government career pathways, mostly from the private sector, and bring that experience with them. Now that has been really positive actually in looking at how do we plan projects, how do we deal with risk in a way that the private sector is more used to doing. But of course there's learning about how local government works in that context. So that's where we are on control frameworks. On risk management, you'll see there's a substantial paper in the pack. We've been looking at enhancing and making more consistent our approach to risk for several years now. we've made a lot of progress in the last 6 to 8 months in terms of treating risks more systematically, putting the right layers of risk management in place, publishing risks transparently and updating them regularly. There is no room for complacency in that, and as the report and as Bronner said this morning, treatment of that is not as consistent as I would like across the whole of the organisation. But culturally, the approach to risk, I think, is becoming much more embedded, and we consider risks formally through all of our leadership and management processes. We're getting better as a consequence of that at picking up cross-cutting risks and properly mitigating those risks. And in effect, I believe now that certainly the corporate risk registers, they do truly reflect the things that directors and our leadership team spend our time worrying about. But there is still definitely work to do on the consistency and the consistent treatment of risk within different parts of the organisation. Governance, as I've said, we are in the process of changing our governance arrangements to give more empowerment to directors, to allow more rapid decision making and to increase bandwidth. We changed those arrangements 6 months ago. We've been running them for 6 months. We've had a lot of learning as directors and as the corporate centre through those processes, and Satinder is now in the process of reviewing how the first 6 months have gone. And we were having a conversation about this only this morning. Satinder's got observations and suggestions for changes that we're going to consider over the coming weeks. One thing that I will flag is that we've chosen also in our internal officer governance to bring in non-executive directors to give us check and challenge and advice at an officer level. We've done that to what we call the Senior Leadership Board, SLB, with non-executive directors with experience in governance, but we've also got specialist non-executives with infrastructure backgrounds being brought into our mass transit outcome boards as well. So we are looking, I hope that demonstrates that we're looking wherever we can improve and strengthen governance through whatever means we're looking to achieve that. Assurance, we have, I think, what is largely considered a best-in-class assurance framework signed off by the government annually, and which we apply to all of the projects that we operate with. So I think we have the right framework, and that provides a process map and a really strong focus on value for money in decision making and in operation. I think the challenge we face there is the same one that the government faced when it was looking at reviewing its own Green Book processes, because there are parallels between the two, which is that too often assurance is seen as a hurdle to get through rather than a fundamental part of building a business case and establishing good value for money in that. So I was part of the advisory board for the government's Green Book work, and so we're looking to very much to bring some of that learning and expertise into our own revisions to our assurance process. And we have a quite substantial internal change programme looking at how we strengthen our approach to project management and how we bring in more agile project approaches going forwards. That is really important for us as we move into the Combined Authority being one of the 4 places in the country that are taking forward a single settlement to start at the end of March 2026, which places much greater emphasis on the agility of our decision making and being able to make choices between different funding streams. Finally, the questions that have been raised by members on the speed of response to internal audit responses reports definitely acknowledge that has taken too long to address on occasion. Sometimes that was because the underlying issues were taking time to resolve, for example, in the work around assets. Sometimes it's because it's been part of the development programme for the transformation projects themselves. I'm thinking of the CIA enterprise system in that context. But I don't think there's been enough dialogue between the teams that are responsible for those changes and the internal audit teams, both in terms of the work during the production of the internal audit report and in terms of the implementation and helping the internal audit teams understanding why things are taking longer than we might otherwise want. So we definitely want to work harder on that. Equally, our teams do work really closely together. So we have had some limited assurance reports on some of the adult education budget providers, that we see as a really positive thing, because it is helping us understand the nature of the provider market, and allowing us to improve that. So not all of the limited assurance reports are things that definitely always point to the organisation, but the majority definitely do. So I think I'll draw a line on it there, if I may, Chair. Just to end where I began, we take this really seriously. Our timeline is to get ourselves back into the kind of, dare I say, adequate position, which is the top category, which is where we have been until this year. We want to achieve that next year, and we, myself and the director team, are going to pull out every stop we can to make sure that happens. Not just because we want the score, but because it's fundamental to actually being an organisation that's in the right space for the challenges that lie ahead.
Thank you for that. I think that's very useful context, and it's good to hear the plans and the commitment to getting this right. Councillor Homer, did you have a query still?
Yes, sorry, it's just a quick one, and I apologise if this is just me getting up to speed with the papers and how these come to the committee. But it was just on the appendix where it had the summary of the audit actions reports. Quite a lot of so they explained what audit taken place, what the findings were, but then a lot of it just said, and there's some recommendations. And I know there's a report later that was looking at actions, but then I couldn't always see correlation between the two things, and I was just trying to understand, how do we assure ourselves, okay, an audit's been completed, it's a minimal finding, but how do we know actions are in place and on track? Is that in a different report that's going to come another time? I just wanted to check what the position was on that.
Yeah, and should we come back to that under the management response? That would be good. Thank you. Rob, quickly, and then Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was quite comfortable with Bron's overall opinion, but I just wonder, from a perspective of sort of clarity for the committee, of just being able to sort of reflect in the summary of work which aspects of governance, risk or controls was the main focus, and therefore being able to link a little bit clearer your opinion in those three areas based on the work that you've done. Now I could see, obviously, having seen the summary progress report, the genesis of your opinion, but I think it might help the committee for next year, and probably progress reports of just being able to see the focus of the audits and the key recommendations that come out and how they relate to governance, risk or controls. Perhaps also the key issues arising from advisory work, because I know that it's not just the opinions that form your overall opinion, it's management's response to pieces of advisory work as well. So just seeing how they have contributed to your opinion in sort of breadth and depth, I think would be helpful moving forward. And then just one very small point, I guess. I noted that technical issue that you don't sort of seem to report in your own name, but you make reference to currently report to Kate. Is that something that is being looked at in terms of structural changes?
Sorry, I always do this at the wrong time. I need to clear my throat. That is something that is under discussion. I meet regularly with Ben. We do talk about the reporting lines. We are clear that there is still room for improvement there. Are you meaning about the report papers being in mine and a director's name, effectively?
Yeah, effectively, because as head of internal audit, there is an expectation that you report in your own name to demonstrate that independence. And it's a slightly technical point, but you make reference that you currently report to Kate, which obviously inferred that there was likely change to that.
I'll just pick that. So Bron reports to me and Bron's team, and that is a functional, kind of aspect about actually making sure that the team is part of our organisation, is part of a large directorate and has a support network around it. Obviously, Bron is, in the head of internal audit opinion, actually fully independent. She has a direct line to Ben in there. So there is two dual roles there. It's a bit like myself, I guess, as a statutory officer, having a legal responsibility and also a functional responsibility as a director of this organisation. So Bron has full independence, but she is also part of my family, I guess, in a functional responsibility.
David, you had a query, and then we've got Councillor Dacre, then Councillor Pollard.
Yes, just a very quick one because it relates to, I think, the point that the councillor raised. As for the minutes, last time we asked whether we could have access to the full internal audit reports rather than just a short summary paragraph. Has there been any progress in that? We haven't seen anything coming forward on that.
So, yes, so for this next year, for the next plan year, what we're aiming to do is build a repository of information for the committee members to access outside of the meeting, so you can actually see the full report. So that is in train to develop, and we're going to kick it off with the new audit reports that come out this next year, which have also seen a change. And you know, just picking up on some of what Rob said there, the EQA, which I'm leaping ahead to the next agenda item, picked up a few similar queries about highlighting the risk aspects, whether that is a governance risk, a control risk, or what. So we've actually changed the reporting formats for the reports themselves, which will feed through to the annual opinion at the end of the year. So hopefully you'll see that progression, and it will make it a little bit clearer. It will also help us, I think, to develop those themes of where we believe there are specific concerns that we can bring to this committee then for the formal minutes and records. So hopefully you'll see quite a lot of change in this next plan year. We're trying to get this one put to bed so we can actually move on and do all that positive development work, which we're quite excited about. But hopefully that answers.
Okay, Councillor Dacre.
Yes, thank you. So I think you're right when you mentioned the fact that you're doing your audits in the context of huge organisational change, and only time will tell whether you're confident that the limited and minimal reports that you've got and that background to that is going to be able to improve at the same time as more organisational change, and I hope you're right that is going to improve. I just wanted to ask firstly about the advisory reports. There's quite a lot of those, and how you decide how it's determined when you as an organisation would carry out those rather than one of the other reports. And the other question I had was about your plan, and I can't now just find whether there was a separate document that dealt with your plan for this year or whether it was in the same one. So it's a separate one, so I'll ask that question when it comes to that. So if you could just...
Yeah, in terms of the advisory work, I'm glad you asked that, because I always do a bit of analysis just to have up my sleeve to demonstrate that actually the balance of advisory and assurance work is, I believe, appropriate. So we're currently, if you look at the actual pieces of work that were done, we're a 70-30 split currently with assurance versus advisory. As a head of audit, and certainly in my previous experience, I'd be quite content to head to a 60-40 split if that was necessary. And that you tend to do when there are big change programs coming around and you're getting in early to give lots of critical friend advice. So I'm quite happy that we're at the right level of that. How we get to determining which is advisory and which is assurance is very much set out in the plan for the next year. So when we get to that agenda item, you'll see we've got a lot of assurance work planned, very little advisory work planned. But what we have done is we've put a contingency pot into every single directorate. And the conversations I'm having with directors currently is, how do you want to use that contingency? It is very much geared to advisory work. What are you building, starting, developing, doing that you want us to come and do early advisory work on? So by the end of the year, I'll be happy if we're at 60-40, but equally happy at 70-30. So I'm quite content with where we are for this year.
Thank you.
Councillor Pollard, did you want to come back?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this bit of the meeting is in the public domain. Page 31, enhancing risk management and compliance. So I don't want any response to sort of wander off into the item 12 exempt bit. But weaknesses in risk identification, escalation and compliance, with particular reference to IT. Now, obviously, cyber security stuff is key at the moment. But is this purely in respect of contracts for buying new kit and that sort of stuff, rather than operational IT issues?
So can you just be cognisant that we have got a closed agenda item on that? Yeah.
So very specifically, it is more around what we would just term your BAU IT work. The specific stuff around the really significant corporate risks around ICT concerns, as the Chair's mentioned, is dealt with separately in the paper further on. And we do separate pieces of work on that. So it is much more the BAU ICT stuff.
And Ben, I think you wanted to come in, did you?
Thank you, Chair. Well, it was only just on the point around the internal audit report and Bron's ownership of it. I mean, just to give assurance, it is entirely Bron's report, and we don't seek to influence that in any way. But if it would help for future reports to have Bron as the kind of owner as well as author, we can easily do that to provide that clarity.
Thank you. Councillor, did you want to come in? Yeah.
Yeah, I should declare, last year I was on scrutiny with Councillor Anderson. So on page 26, it's good to hear that the internal audit reports will be published at some stage. So I'm particularly interested in the access bus report, but also there is a flexibus report, I think, that hopefully will be available at some stage. And so I think that would be really useful to share. And on page 28, where it says about proven fraud, I'd like to know how much was lost actually in terms of fraud.
Thank you. Bron?
So the two proven fraud cases, one related to an adult skills provider, and we are going through the debt recovery process on that. So we don't know we don't think that there will actually be a loss. We think we will recover everything in that particular case. The other one was quite a small grant that was given out to a business. It was less than £3,000, so for materiality it was not significant. However, we are also still pursuing debt recovery. We are not as confident we will get that back just because of the nature of where that organisation is currently and where their directors are or are not. But we are still pursuing that, so it's still going through a debt recovery process. We do make every effort where we have proven fraud to actually make sure we do whatever we can to secure the public funds back into the organisation. Flexibus, we did that audit in the previous year, I think, so there may have been reference to it in something. Very happy to put that in the repository though when we share all of our audit reports. And the access bus, we had quite a long and detailed conversation with the team about the improvements that were needed there, and we have agreed management actions that will come back to this committee to report back on progress.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dacre.
Thanks. Sorry, struggling to find things in the order. So of the minimal assurance ones, the one that I thought was of most concern was the business continuity, because the ones that are to do with external providers, I mean, they've always, I think, been a risk ever since all of this stuff got outsourced years ago. But business continuity is entirely within the authority's hands, and you're doing more and more difficult. And so I was just really concerned by the situation that's in, and obviously, yes, we will see as time goes on how successful the authority is in changing that, but that was the one that worried me most when I saw it.
Thank you. And we come back to that under management actions.
Yes, absolutely.
Management responses, yes, thank you. Okay, so if there are no other questions, can we note that the committee's considered the paper? Thank you. And we'll move on to the External Quality Assessment and Improvement Plan, which is agenda item 7. So I think there's some very positive aspects in that, so well done to Bron and her team for that. I think the recommendations are very welcome because they should help us further strengthen the governance, and some of the actions have already been discussed by this committee and are in train, which is encouraging that we're on the front foot. Bron, did you want to update us on the current position or add anything to the report, or Kate?
No, not particularly. I'm very happy to take questions. It is the answer to the who audits the auditor question. That is what the EQA report effectively is. It was quite a difficult process. I'm not sure that I would go through the peer review process again. I think asking one of the professional bodies to come in and do the assessment is probably a lot faster. lot quicker, because we felt like we waited quite a long time to get the report, and we were keen to take actions forward. And so that's just a reflection on the process, but we don't have another one now for another 5 years. So what we do need to do is make sure that actually we don't just rest on our laurels, having done well here, but to keep bringing back to this committee our quality improvement plan. That's really where the change sits in terms of progressing the quality of the internal audit function. So that's what we will keep bringing back to this committee.
Thanks, Bron. That's going to be one of my points. If we can have a regular report back on progress, that would be really useful. I also wondered, when you get the repository going, if it'd be useful to drop the standards against which they audit you into that, so we can understand that.
So that piece of work is ongoing at the moment. So the EQA currently has been dropped into our quality improvement plan. The work on the gap analysis against the new audit standards is underway, and we will drop that into the QA, the quality improvement plan as well. So you will see that in its totality, and we'll make sure it's clear which relates to both and which relates to one or the other.
Thank you. So questions from members? Got
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, this EQA was set against the old public sector internal audit standards. Obviously, we've got new ones, and you're quite right to be off the hook for another inspection for 5 years. I think it would be helpful for the committee, as inevitably you will, as part of your quality assurance and improvement programme, to see your self-assessment at some point in the next sort of 12-18 months against the new standards, because whilst they don't change significantly, there are some significant nuances that, obviously, for the committee's assurance that you are responding to those new standards and requirements.
I think that would be really helpful, and I was hoping that at some point we might want to do a workshop session around that, so we can actually dive into it. And if we could link that to not just the self-assessment against the standards by the team, but also to the assessment of the team by the business, which is also an annual requirement, and I thought it would be very helpful to link those. But a workshop seems like a better place to kind of really dig into the detail, as it were. If everybody's amenable to that, we can put that on the plan.
No, I'm in support of that, thank you. Councillor Pollard.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very minor one on this one, on page 59, recommendation 9. To ensure that the team is able to use the data analytics skills it has, it is recommended that appropriate analytics software is made available to the team. So just a slightly raised eyebrow there. So how is data analysis currently being done without appropriate software?
So we had a slight difference of opinion with the auditor on this one. We do have data analytics software, we do use it, but it's currently only on 3 of our team's laptops, and that's a licensing issue. They felt it was really important that every member of the team had access to the data analytics. We couldn't actually disagree that that wouldn't be helpful, but nonetheless it suggests that we're not doing something that we currently are. We did bring a data analytics report to the previous audit committee, which again, for new members, we're happy to put in that repository so you can see what the plan is. And that's forming part of the internal audit strategy overall, so that data analytics bits. We absolutely value the use of data analytics in we want to get to continuous real-time auditing as quickly as we can. So, yeah, it is there, we are using it.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? Okay, so we'll wait for an update, Bron, on progress and, as Rob suggested, against new plans. Sorry, yeah.
Can I ask one question where I'm a little bit confused about the terminology? It's recommendation 15, and it talks about the effectiveness of WICA's ethics-related objectives, programmes and activities. What do you mean by ethics?
So a number of awarding bodies for internal auditors have a requirement for audit teams to do ethics training, and it's ethics in relation to the conduct of their work. So the awarding bodies differ in what they require. So we, in the run-up to this EQA, our process had been to allow auditors to do whatever fit with the requirements of their awarding body. But what the auditor was drawing out was actually the need to then translate that into how the CA audit team approaches those ethical standards and making sure it was consistent across the team. So we're building that into our team development programme, and in fact we have a workshop coming up on the ethics so that we can actually make sure that we're not all just applying our own independent professional bodies' ethical standards and what they require, but that we do as a team have a consistent approach as well. So it was about normalising and making sure that it was more comprehensive.
No further questions? No, so if you can note that the committee has commented on the action plan and the audit itself. Thank you. Agenda item 8, and we're still on audit. So this is for the committee to give final approval for the 25-26 audit plan. And at April G&A, the committee saw the draft plan and we had the opportunity to comment on that. So this revised plan reflects those comments, although I appreciate it's the first time the new members will have seen it. So, Bron, any key things that you want to draw out before we go to questions?
Just to confirm that the additional areas we highlighted verbally at the last committee are built into the plan, so everybody should be seeing everything that's been agreed to date. But also to highlight that following the issuing of the opinion, I'm having regular conversations with the directors to build in those contingency advisory pieces that I mentioned. So again, we will reiterate, we will bring the plan back, so the committee will always see the latest position, and we will continue to do the reprioritisation exercise for every quarterly update, where we move things from the do later and the do next into the do now, and reprioritise the kind of rolling programme. So you should get a regular sense of where we are, what's important, what is reflecting the kind of current risk profile in the organisation.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, Rob?
Yeah, just very quickly. If we're going to have the workshop on internal audit, which I think would be a really good idea, if we could include the rationale for audit planning within that, because again, I think that might help the committee appreciate what the process you go through to come up with these things.
Yeah, and that was picked up in the EQA as well, so we're on with that.
Councillor Dacre.
Thank you. So I know we're going to answer yes to this, because otherwise you wouldn't have said it, but I just want reassurance really around the capacity and in your plan for follow-up, because obviously there's a lot of follow-up for you arising from some of those limited and minimal audit reports, and also grants. And I suppose I only say this because at Calderdale we certainly got tripped up by grants and huge numbers of those suddenly coming in and diverting audit capacity from what was on the plan. So, and as I say, a large amount of follow-up. So just you're comfortable that you've got that capacity and that balance right.
So on the grants question particularly, we're doing a lot of work internally at the moment on grant management generally. Included within that is work we've done in the team to identify our grant pipeline so that we're not caught out. But we've developed a protocol in terms of the kind of the audit view on grant sign-off, which I think is sitting with the finance team at the moment, just to look at taking that forward with the DOFs to agree how that protocol might be widened out. So it's not just, so we've done it obviously for our organisation, but it might apply elsewhere. So there's a lot of work going on around that, because that is something that can suddenly absorb almost all your capacity with very little forward warning. We're in a much better position than we were last year and the year before. Sorry, the first question rather, can you remind me what that was? Yeah, and we absolutely do build that into the plan, and that's why we keep contingency. So we need to be mindful that we don't overextend ourselves on the contingency. But that is part of the reprioritisation exercise we would have to do, and we'd have to think about what was the more significant risk at that point. But yeah, it's continually in our mind.
I think it was Councillor Galton.
Sorry, it's more of a general question than a specific reference to the report. Following on from the question from Councillor Dacre, we do have
employees within the organisation whose responsibility is to carry out evaluation of money which is spent with outside organisations. However, I'm not sure how much of that evaluation remit is associated with good financial and governance activity to enable you to carry out your internal audit role so that you're not distracted as a professional to look at stuff because there's already good practice within that evaluation process. Can you offer us some clarity on whether that's the case?
So I will be in a better position to answer that question when we finish some work that we've got ongoing at the moment around assurance mapping. We are very mindful. We are not the only assurance provider in the organisation, nor is there a kind of a detailed understanding of where and what those assurances are covering. So to answer your question about whether it is focused on the financial aspects, the governance aspects, etc. I'm working with the governance. I'm looking at Natalie because she's the lead for governance, risk and compliance. She and I are working on developing that assurance mapping for the organisation, which not only sort of gives you an idea of where there might be gaps and where there might be a need for us to step in to do some more formal work, but will also identify where there may be some duplication, where we can actually say we can do less there because actually that's doing that really well. So we are in train with that piece of work. It's going to be quite a significant step forward in the visual sort of understanding of the organisation as to where all these assurances sit. So we are very, very mindful that that's a powerful piece of work that we need to crack on with. So if I can bring that back to the committee, I will happily do that. And again, if the committee wants a separate session on that to look at that in more detail, I'm also happy to manage that.
Thanks, Brian. I think, I know you're going to bring it back to the committee because it's a piece of work we've been asking for a while, but you just haven't had the capacity to do. But that will also help inform the work of this committee and areas we might want to test as well as a committee. So it's going to be a hugely important document for this group. So I think if we could have a session on it and work out what we as a committee want to do with that information once we see it, I think it's important. Okay. Any other queries? Yes, Councillor.
I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but still, on the Homes Energy, item 16, I just wondered what's happened to the one-stop energy shop, which may have been going to start in April this year.
Ron?
So, sorry, Kate, did you want to step in? No.
Ben's happy to take it as well, Bron, if you
Well,
want.
Ben, feel free.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, so just in terms of the project itself, the one-stop shop is its first incarnation is as a website for where people can go for information about the range of retrofit and home energy improvement projects and advice that is available. That is due for launch in the autumn, so the work is proceeding. That's where it is in the programme sense. So it's the work's carrying on.
Thank you. Any other questions on that agenda item? No. So can I ask if the committee approve the plan? Can you just raise your hands? Thank you very much. Yes, I think the committee approves the plan. Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 9, and that's the management response to internal audit recommendations. So the committee is asked to note the management response and to review and comment on the update on the internal audit recommendations. This, for members' information, a management response was recently separated from the audit recommendations into a separate paper. However, my feeling is that the report isn't really giving the committee the clarity on actions to be taken and the progress that we intended by splitting the report out. It's also feels slightly disjointed from the audit findings, that we're discussing them separately like this. So I would propose that this probably needs a bit of extra work, but I'd welcome members' thoughts on that. David?
Yeah, I think we can see some clear progress here, which is good. There's some better information here and some progress on clearing points, but there's still a long way from where it needs to be. We seem to have lost the table that was showing us the analysis of the outstanding points, those points that have gone past due, that are aged. So we need to have that back in so we can have visibility. Last time round there were, I think, 57 actions that were still outstanding, which is far from where we need to be. And all the way through here, I think we can see quite a few missing dates, quite a few vague dates, quite a few vague statements. I'll just highlight one, maybe than going through loads of them. For example, page 97, and this is one area we might want to cover in our closed session. Vulnerability management. The point is about clearing a vulnerabilities backlog. The comments are really about the process that is now in place to monitor the backlog. Doesn't say anything about the backlog or when that will be cleared. So unless we can get some clarity on actually clearing the point, I think that's the sort of information I think we're missing, and we need to see a lot more of here. But this is a lot better than where we started out, and having it separate I think is the right way.
Councillor Pollard.
Thank you, Chair. As a Bradford member, well cognizant of the dramas we had with the transport interchange, just looking at page 95, and there's actually a blank space in the management response to the recommendation there on the health and safety team coordinating with bus station managers and relevant officers to access to building condition surveys. And that had an agreed due date with the business partner of 31st August last year. So just a little update on what the story is there with regard to procurement of asset management surveys.
Yeah, Ben, did you want to come back on that, or who'd like to take that?
Does Natalie want to start, and then I'll come in?
I'm just wanting to check that I've got the correct recommendation, because on the report that I see here it says this recommendation is dependent on the work of the facilities team. Is that the recommendation you meant, member?
I'm looking at page 95, the narrative recommendation is that the health and safety team coordinate with bus station managers and relevant officers, etc., etc. And there's a blank space in the response column there, and I was just wondering what the current story is with regard to the procurement of these asset management surveys with its original agreed date of 31st August last.
So the column is blank. There is a response in the final column which commits to asset management surveys are currently being procured, and that is part of a wider assets policy for the combined authority. And then there will be a further update once those surveys have been undertaken and the outcomes are known in terms of delivering the recommendation. But certainly we could go back to exploring why that second column has been left blank and complete it for next time.
Thank you. Yes, if you could do that. I think we've got Councillor Homewood.
Yeah, thank you. So it falls on, I guess, some of the comments earlier, and bearing in mind this is the first time I'm looking at this, so I haven't seen the progress that's come forward. My only additional thoughts were, I'm not sure, in my mind, that a recommendation is the same as an action. So I'm not sure here I always understand. So we've made a recommendation, but what actually is the action that was agreed? Because sometimes there's a recommendation, then a management response, and then there's a difference. There's not always the same level of information that's provided to each one. So I think it would be helpful for us to understand, okay, there was a recommendation, but what actually has been agreed as a management action to take part in that, to complete that. And then I think the second point was what had already been sort of mentioned earlier, which is I found it quite difficult to understand the dates and things. Why are the dates that are well past? There's no revision, there's no explanation. I think to me it would be useful to have something like a RAG status on these that are either overdue or on track or something like that, which would help us then focus on the significant actions that are overdue, and then potentially if that continues to happen, then we can have management come in to explain why those actions are overdue, etc. So yeah, that was it really, just how it kind of further improvements, I guess, that could be made.
Absolutely, those are very good points. I actually found when I was reading it that it felt that some of the actions were very vague as well, and also some of the items were closed off when I was questioning whether they really should have been. So it said put training in place or undertake training, were like training in place closed. I thought, well, no, because it has to be undertaken and understood before it's closed. So I think there's quite a bit of tidying up, and maybe if people have any thoughts on that, we can feed them in outside of this meeting, can we, just for the sake of time, and then you could bring something back to us?
I actually do think this process needs reconsidering, because I think we've attempted to deal with it in a way that's made it more confusing. Because management are now responding to a separate team with the update for this paper, we don't have the opportunity to really challenge that and make sure that those actions are complete, because we've seen the evidence, we've tested it. So I think it would be better if this did come from audit rather than from another team, with absolutely the emphasis on, just as Councillor Homewood has suggested, management coming to speak to the actual content of those action updates, as opposed to you know, an indecisive, is this a completed action or is it not? Because it's been reported as completed to Natalie doesn't mean we've signed it off. So I think we're adding a level of complexity here that is not helpful. And I would prefer to take ownership of this back, but with a fuller report, so we could absolutely include it in our papers, with all of the points that I think are really valid about management recommendations and actions and responses, etc., being much more clear about what is responding to what. Our new reporting style is also driving that I mentioned. We changed the way we're reporting. We've done a little bit of tidying up around that so that the reports are clearer, with clear owners, clear specific actions to address the findings. So hopefully you will see a lot more clarity going forward. But if the committee are content for me to reacquire this reporting, I'm really happy to do that.
Thanks, Bron. Before we sort of discuss that, I think Ben wants to come in, and then Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's just to agree with Bron, really. I think that's a helpful suggestion. I was going to suggest three things, particularly in relation to the assets point that's been raised, because I don't think it's great that there's a blank box in the report. I think insofar as that needs specific date telling, we'll pass a note round back to the committee on that in between meetings, just so that there's clarity on by when those actions will be undertaken. I think the second thing is, I think Bron's view around there's an opportunity here for the committee to ask officers to come and explain the situation, because obviously they might have a set of perspectives that would help the committee understand why things haven't been or have been achieved. So maybe assets, which is, and I particularly raised assets in my opening remarks because I think it is an area where we still need to do more work. But the committee could ask Simon Warburton or Tim Taylor to come to the next committee to talk about that specifically. And then I completely agree on RAG ratings and the traffic light colours as well, which we use internally. So that's probably just something that's got dropped, but we need to put it back. It's very helpful visual aid.
Thank you. Councillor Jenkins. And then Councillor.
Yeah, on page 115, I just wondered how many exit interviews have been carried out and what the results were. And on EDI, we've done a lot of work in Leeds City Council on EDI issues, and where it talks about having a toolkit, I'm sure we could learn, that the combined authority could learn, I think, from our council about and probably Bradford and Calderdale and the others as well. But in particular also around misogyny as an issue.
Thank you. Did anyone want to come back on that observation or not? Any of the officers?
In terms of the exit interviews, they are voluntary. So that may explain some of the figures around that. And I know that HR colleagues are looking at ways to encourage people to participate in those exit interviews, because they in fact provide a lot of valuable information to enable us to better manage people's career options and their experience of working for the combined authority. So it is something that HR do have in hand. And for reassurance, the members of the committee, we have a very active EDI team, very small but very active within the organisation, providing advice and steer, and looking to make sure that via the steering group, which is chaired by one of the directors, is on top of the business that needs to be done in terms of ensuring that we don't rest on our laurels. We know that we've had increased diversity in the staff numbers, but seeking to make sure that that runs right through the organisation. And in fact, yesterday we were just talking, colleagues were talking about how to enhance pipelines for ensuring that all parts of our communities are encouraged to join the combined authority.
Thanks, Natalie. Ben?
Just to add to Natalie's comments, my understanding is that the team already work very closely with the local authorities, and there's quite a lot of sharing of best practice across the piece.
Thank you. Any further questions on that? Oh, Councillor Dacre.
Chair. I suppose I just want to say that I think my role here is to oversee the effectiveness of the internal audit procedures, and so it's fine to have directors or whoever it might be to come and answer for why things haven't been done, but to some extent that's your job, and our job is just to make sure that you're doing that properly, rather than actually start taxing the officers about, well, why haven't you done. So I'd just be concerned about how to make sure we get the balance right of us not diving into your job.
I think that's fair. I think the process bit, absolutely, I own that, and that's why I want to wrestle it back, because I think it sits better with that oversight from us. In terms of the content, though, I think the committee should always be able to call management in to answer for the progress they're making. Is it quickly enough? Is what they're actually doing really sufficient in the view of the committee? So I think there is a balance there, and it is just about finding the right the call from this committee for the areas that they really need to exercise their governance overview of. But yeah, I'm very clear the process should and is mine.
Councillor Homewood.
Yeah, I was just going to add on that point that I think it's important that we don't get bogged down in the specific details of actions and decisions, but I think there is a benefit where important action plans aren't being delivered, that the ability to summon someone to come to a committee can make a difference in terms of getting those explanations and getting actions done, which I think we should make sure we have the ability to do.
Yeah, thank you. And we have done that before, and it has been very valuable. But if we are going to see the management responses in the way they are, it's what does that mean in terms of is the system broken, which is Councillor Dacre's point, and it's a very valid one, isn't it? What's it telling us about the effectiveness of governance and audit if things aren't being closed off? So I think rather than, as well as looking at the detail, the committee needs to consider that bigger picture as well. Ben, do you want to come in?
It's just to agree with both those points from Councillor Homewood and Councillor Dacre, really. I think there is a balance to be struck, as Bron said, but you're absolutely right. I think there's also an overlap or potential overlap with scrutiny, and I see Councillor Anderson in the audience in terms of whose job it is to look at the kind of the content issues.
So can I suggest that maybe you bring back a proposal for how this could be adjusted to the next committee, because I don't think we've got time to do it justice today to discuss this. I think it would take a bit of a workshop, but if you could come back with some thoughts on how we can accommodate everybody's views and get what we need to as a committee to give us the assurance.
Can I propose that I bring a new report back, and give the committee an opportunity to look at something and say whether that meets the purpose or not? If the committee are happy with that.
Thank you. Is the committee happy with that approach? Yes, thank you. So if you can note that we'll see a report at the next meeting. Thank you. So if there are no further questions on that, we'll move to agenda item 10, and that's the external audit report, an update from Mazars on the 24-25 audit process.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, as you say, this report just sets out the latest position for the 24-25 audit. I suppose just to provide some context for the newer members of the committee, as part of the government's reset and recovery position for the backstop in local audit, we issued disclaimed opinions on both the 22-23 and 23-24 statement of accounts. That was the reset phase of the process. We're now into the recovery phase, which is around how we rebuild assurance over that period where we issued disclaimed opinions, plus look at the audits going forward, so the 24-5 accounts, which are on the agenda later on. The National Audit Office issued guidance to us in June, which is called LARIG 06, on how we rebuild that assurance, and that sets out the details of the risk assessment procedures we're required to undertake, and from that risk assessment then how we develop the procedures to build those procedures over that disclaimed opinion period. we're planning to undertake that risk assessment as soon as possible, so over the summer months. However, we do expect that given the time that it will take to complete that and carry out the rebuild procedures, it is still likely that we will issue a disclaimed opinion for the 24-25 audit, and we'll look to rebuild in full for next year's audit. That's obviously dependent on the outcome of that risk assessment procedure that Alistair will undertake. He will work closely with officers to determine what rebuild work we can undertake in 24-25, because we don't want to leave it all this year and do it next. We do want to do some of that this year and provide the committee with some level of assurance over the 24-25 statements. So that will focus on the more complex areas, such as things like the pensions liability, the application of the asset ceiling that's taken place over the last couple of years, and the new standard on leasing, which has come in for the first time this year. So we do want to look at some of that early. The other half of our work is our work around value for money arrangements, and there has been a change in that this year. So the timetable's been decoupled from the general accounts timetable. So that work now has to be reported in draft by November. So we'll bring a report back to the committee setting out our findings to date. If there are any changes between issuing that draft report and the point where we issue the audit opinion on this year's accounts, then we will issue an updated final version of our auditor's annual report. But in practice, we're trying to get all that work done by November so that there aren't any changes to report back to members of the public. I wasn't going to go into any more detail at this stage, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Can I just check if the new members of the committee are familiar with all the backstory to the audit delays? So you can, yes, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah, lovely, thank you. Kate, did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, obviously, we understand the position we're in at the moment in terms of what Daniel's just set out around the likelihood of a disclaimed opinion for 24-25. We've been very clear with Alistair that we need to be back on track for 25-26 with a full audit opinion. In there is absolute commitment from my team to do that and to get back to that position. So obviously we'll be working with Ms. Ars and expect the same commitment back there to get to that position.
Thank you. Any questions from any members on this? No? Can I just ask one? You did mention that you're expecting a report from National Audit on whether any further work is required. Do you know, have you had that? Do you know when it'll be?
Sorry, yeah, that's the report I referred to that came out in June. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you. So if there are no further questions, thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 11. And that's the Joint Independent Audit Committee Annual Report, and this provides information on the observations relating to the Policing and Crime Team and West Yorkshire Police. This is provided annually to G&A for note, but this is the first year that we've actually seen this report, so the full report. So if is that right, Bron? Yes. Yeah. Yes, so we've got two people here to take us through any points of note and just to introduce the report to us. So I'm not sure which one of you is going to take that.
Want to go first?
I'm going to go first. I wondered if there was some merit in just going back over a bit of context in terms of the Joint Independent Audit Committee for some members. So back in 2012, when the Police and Crime Commissioner functions were established, at the same time a Joint Independent Audit Committee function was set up. They meet 4 times a year. It's comprised of 4 independent members, and one of those being the chair, which is Mike, who's with me today. And then fast forward to 2021, when the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner was brought into the combined mayoral authority, and the mayor became the Police and Crime Commissioner. That function essentially continued as it was, and the committee is there enabled and required to have oversight of and provide an independent review and recommendations to the Chief Constable and the Mayor on the effectiveness of West Yorkshire Police and the Mayor's Police and Crime Commissioner functions in relation to governance, risk management, control frameworks, financial reporting, governance processes and internal and external audit. And as part of that, to present an annual report to this committee. My apologies if that hasn't happened for the last couple of years.
I'm just on a point of note, can I just check, is that right? Yeah.
That is correct, yeah.
I thought I did, and I came last July to talk through the report. I thought a copy was provided at that committee, so I would quite like that checked, because I did. The report is made public, so that is it's available for all members to review. But I did think, I don't know if anybody was here, I can remember, that I did present. I think my report was copied last year.
Yeah, I think you definitely did come and talk to the committee, but I don't think there was a report as part of our papers.
Fine, okay, thank you.
Just to add then, the report's here today. Mike can introduce, bring out any key points, and happy to answer any questions on that.
Yeah, I think there's reference in the cover paper to a couple of issues that we've been discussing and I've been discussing with Rob. One is around just double checking that our terms of reference for the Joint Independent Audit Committee are correct. I am happy as chair that we comply with CIPFA's guidance on police audit committees, CIPFA being the Certified Institute of Public Financial Accountants. So we regularly compare our terms of reference against that best practice guidance. However, that best practice guidance does not account for a combined authority arrangement. I have contacted CIPFA personally this year to say, look, are you doing any work to issue a set of guidance for police audit committees who work in the combined authority environment? And they said, oh, good idea, would you mind helping write it for us? To which I said, no, I think it's your responsibility to provide us that guidance. So we are in a slight limbo. So as a result of that, I asked Rob to carry out a review just to make sure that as far as we were aware, we'd got the terms of reference and the balance right between the work of my committee, the work of this committee, the work of internal audit for the police, the work of internal audit for Bron's team. And I think you've concluded there aren't any major gaps in that assurance, which is the main thing, to make sure we're not letting something slip between the two committees. But you've got a final report you've got a report in draft on that review of the terms of reference, and that's going to be completed fairly shortly, is that right?
Yeah, so just briefly on that. So I'm relatively new in post, about 8 months in. So one of the things I wanted to do was undertake a review of the assurance processes within policing and crime, which encompassed the Joint Independent Audit Committee, internal audit, and how we were working together, and how that fits into all the different mechanisms. So it's been through the Police and Crime Executive Board. We're about to take it to the quarterly governance meeting, which we have with West Yorkshire Police at that point that we signed off. But it didn't identify any assurance gaps. It was more of an assurance and a reassurance piece for us.
Yeah, the other thing I would, thanks Rob, would sort of draw members' attention to is on internal audit. We had a very positive session with Bron at our last committee to absolutely nail the relationship between internal audit in the combined authority and the work of JIAC, and we'll be getting 6 monthly updates from Bron at our committee on any work that they've done, that she and her team have done, that can provide either direct assurance to us because it picks on a piece of particular work that Rob's team is responsible for, or it provides us indirect assurance because it covers financial controls or HR controls or cyber security, something that gives us some indirect assurance that the control environment within which the police and crime team operate is strong and can give us assurance around that governance and control. So those are the kind of two things I'd pick up about specifically that we're looking at currently. But otherwise, during the year, the JIAC has operated successfully in reviewing internal audit work of the police. The police have just reported to us that they have given, their annual report gives reasonable assurance on the internal audit. They carried out 23 reports, 68% of which were reasonable assurance and 32% were limited, along with a number of advisory reports, the kind of things we discussed earlier. And so they came to an overall conclusion of reasonable. We get regular reports on risk management. I observe the Force Risk Management Group on a quarterly basis. I'm also talking to Ishmael, who I don't think is here today, but is working with the West Yorkshire team or Combined Authority team on looking at the risk management framework. And so if there's anything we can learn within the police from the work that Ishmael's doing in the Combined Authority, we'll make sure that we get the best practice to come out of both ways of both the police's risk management process and the Combined Authority's risk management process. we get regular updates from external audit. The police is in a different position to the combined authority. We have not had those disclaimers. We've been able to file, the police have been able to file their accounts on time for the last 3 years, and are looking to file before will conclude this year to the timelines that are required, such as good and positive. We then review a number of different process assurance framework. We review finance and budget planning. We review scheme of delegation, scheme of consent, and then we get very specific reports on things like procurement, treasury, business interests, gifts and hospitality, etc. And what we tried to do is get at least every meeting, hopefully every meeting, we try and get a deep dive by getting the experts that are responsible for managing a particular risk into the committee to give us a bit of a detailed view about how they're managing the specific risks that are on the police's risk register. And then we're going to be getting updates on any recommendations coming out of the inspections the police go through and making sure that those inspection recommendations are followed up. So a pretty full agenda which we've successfully completed against, and that is then covered by the annual report, which shows you how we've met our terms of reference for 24-25. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. You did mention working with Bron to make sure things don't fall between the gaps of the two organisations. I think, again, for the purpose of this committee, ensuring everything in governance is working well, it would be good to have some assurance around that. Will it feature at all in your assurance map?
Certainly the PCC bit will feature in the assurance map, but obviously we don't cover the police side of things. But yeah, I think it is just that assurance map will cover the whole of the CA, of which the PCC are a part.
Okay, so I think we need to understand where the gaps could be and how they've been addressed, or how we've ensured that there aren't any gaps there. So something to bring back around that would be good. I'm not quite sure what though.
Sorry, but I think the gap for me, the gap would be that no work was done on the police and crime team, so that we sitting in the JIAC, we wouldn't be getting any direct assurance that any internal audit work had been done on the police and crime team, because it's the West Yorkshire Police Internal Audit Team do not do work on the police and crime team control environment. That is done by Bron's team, and this year there wasn't a direct audit of anything in Rob's area on your plan for this year. So that's, I think possibly I overstated it to call it a gap. It's just to make sure that we've got the right coverage across the areas that the JIAC is responsible for.
Okay, thank you.
And I think on that point, the police and crime team are part of the CA, where we do work that looks at HR controls, financial controls, etc. The PCC team absolutely part of that. So there is work that's done that would reflect if there were concerns in the PCC team. But I believe that strongly sits with this Governance and Audit Committee, and that actually those assurances feed through here, as do the assurances that Mike then from his committee feeds through here. So ultimately the governance sits here.
Thank you. I think we've got Councillor Jenkins and Councillor Gonson.
Yes, so looking through the report, I noted the use of reserves and deficits going up from 9.5 million in 25-26 to 15 million in 28-29, and that it'd be interesting to see the minutes of the JIAC meeting for May, which I couldn't find.
You have it as a loss. Which page of my report refers to those reserves?
Sorry, so I looked
when you say the reserves number, you're looking at
yes.
the police. Which report are you looking at?
Must have been in one of the linked reports.
I'd have to come back and answer that
That's
separately.
okay.
I don't believe I commented on the reserves numbers within my report on the work of JIAC.
Okay.
So maybe I'm trying to work out whether it would be in one of the appendices. Have you found it in the minutes, have you?
Yes, I found it somewhere.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, come back at a later
yeah.
stage. It just seemed quite an extensive...
We would receive
concern.
business updates from the police's chief financial officer on a quarterly basis, and she may well have given a narrative update on the situation regarding reserves, which we would have taken on board and taken assurance from what the more details that she said at the time. So I'd have to look back at that.
Okay. And when did the minutes of, say, the May, was there a meeting in May, and when
The minutes are, so the meeting in May 25,
yeah.
the minutes of those were approved at the meeting in July 25, which was last week. So they will go through an approval process. So no, hold on. Yes, they should be published fairly shortly because they were approved at our meeting in July. The May meeting minutes were approved at our July meeting. So now that meeting has approved them, they should be published shortly. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Galton.
Thank you. It's following up on the areas of gaps that we mentioned earlier by the Chair. And I note that in the value for money section at 5 on page 150, there is a gap around reporting from the police and crime team. And I just wondered if that was something which was going to come here as opposed to the joint audit committee in terms of reporting, because I'm aware that there are some areas of policing that the Mayor uses her gain share funding to add value to that which is provided by the police themselves.
Yeah, Kate, do you want to take that?
Yeah, ultimately, I mean, as you said, the police and crime function falls under WICA, so it is part of our WICA value for money audit, so it will be part of that opinion that will compass, and all of the work that comes through you, it is part of that piece, so it is covered through that in terms of value for money. So there is, yes, it is part of our overall opinion.
Thank you. Any other questions on that? No, thank you. So if you can recall that the committee's noted the reports, and thank you for your contribution on that. Okay, so agenda item 12 is risk management, and this is where you've got the exempt appendix number 7. I think a lot of work's been undertaken over the last few years to ensure the authority has got a really robust and cohesive risk management system that can support effective management and governance. And I think what we're seeing today is the outcome of all of that work. So I'd like to thank officers for that, because I appreciate the effort that's gone into it. The committee today is being asked to approve 8 matters. So we've got appendix 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 and 9. And also the cover paper at 1.3 details a suite of documents that it is being proposed are brought to G&A at each meeting. So there's quite a lot to go through with this particular agenda item. Just to note that we are planning a workshop on risk management, so we will get more chance to talk about this in detail. So even if the committee approve the framework and everything today, there will be opportunity to feed in, and I know the effectiveness of the system will remain under review. It's not set in stone, it will be something that evolves as the organisation grows and develops. So there'll be plenty of chance for this committee to feed into how they feel it's working and any changes that are made. So, Satinder, are you talking to this one?
So, overarchingly, yes, and with the help of Natalie as well. Okay. So, just to flag, grateful for your observations in terms of those more detailed matters coming back to the committee for further discussion and feedback. Just to flag with committee members regarding the framework, there's been, I think it's fair to say, if I put it this way, there's going to be more digestible points that will need to be shared in terms of the RMS rollout when it comes to the training as part of the embedding phase, and that will include, as part of the rollout, induction guides, risk management training workshops, as you've touched on, commencing later in the year, in autumn. We've got learning and development colleagues within HR to support that as well. There's a dedicated risk hub, learning hub that's been created by team colleagues, and that part of that will be role profile biased relative to all colleagues across the organisation, and there has been a directors' risk forum that's been set up in the form of a Teams channel, and the same applies in terms of that Teams channel for heads of service as well. Just to bring those matters to your attention, I don't know if there's anything that Natalie wants to add that isn't already referred to in the appendix that comes before this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. So there is a lot of information in here. So if we're being asked to approve all those different appendix, if we take one at a time and take questions on them. So the first one is the risk management strategy, which is Appendix 1. So questions on that? Yes, we've got David. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought that generally the materials are very good, very tight and really well put together and very practical, so compliments on that. Just one quick question on the digitisation of this process. It's a little bit confusing on some of the timelines about when the digitisation is planned to happen, whether that's during the development phase, after the development phase, during maturity phase. Just maybe caution suggests that the digitisation happens later in the process once something is more mature rather than in the development phase as well.
Thank you. Satinder?
Happy to pick that up. And so the original ambition was for the digitisation to occur sooner than it will be. It's being pushed back slightly to take into account the interdependencies between the internal rollouts regarding systems and processes and colleagues' understanding. So it's that appropriate placement which is going to be later than indicated to the committee. I don't know if there's anything.
Natalie, do you want to contribute? No? No. Okay. Any other questions on the risk management strategy? No. So are members happy to approve the strategy? Yes, can you just show of hands? Yes, thank you. So we can note that one's been approved. Appendix 2 then is a risk management policy. Any questions or queries on that from members, or anything that Satinder, Natalie want to say? No? No? Okay, so could I ask if members approve the risk management policy? Yep, that's approved. Appendix 3 is the risk placement framework. So anything you want to add on that, Natalie, Satinder? No? Okay, any questions? Yes, David.
Just one quick one. Bottom of page 203, where we're talking about risk appetite levels, noted that in the table above it's got where our risk appetite stance is for governance and security issues is cautious, and then for technology is eager. I'm happy for us to be eager with technology, but there's a footnote on that page that says, however, in relation to technology where it relates to security issues, that should be cautious. And then I just note further down where we've talked about cyber security, it's been put in the wrong risk category. I think it's been talked about as technology and therefore being rated as eager, whereas I think I would certainly be uncomfortable with cyber security being rated as eager as opposed to cautious, where I think it should be. Just to clarify, that's where it should be, and we can make that amendment.
Is that Appendix 3, or is that the risk appetite? Yeah. Okay. Do you want to address that point, Ben?
Sounds exactly right. we would not want a cybersecurity eager risk appetite.
Happy to take that away and make that amendment if the committee is content for that. Thank you.
And perhaps in similar vein, on 204, fatality, there's an open or high risk appetite to fatalities, which again seems somewhat odd. So whether that's a little bit of a gremlin in there.
I think, yes, it's going to be taken away.
No, thank you for spotting the gremlin.
Pollard.
Thank you, Chair. If we are actually on Appendix 4 now, I'm not quite sure what I've appendix.
Risk placement framework.
If we can do that one first, then.
Yeah. Right, members, are you happy to approve the risk placement framework, which is Appendix 3? Yes. Thank you. Right, so the risk appetite statement is Appendix 4, and I think some of the questions come out of that. Councillor Pollard, did you have something on that
Yes,
one?
on Appendix 4. The risk appetite on property is described as eager, which vaguely worries me in terms of dramas that various local authorities have had in respect of property and the sometimes less than robust assessment of risk on property development, etc. I was just wondering, a little bit of narrative there on why we've adopted an eager stance towards property risks, embracing opportunities to innovate, and what sort of innovation are we actually looking at there?
Thank you. Ben's going to answer that one.
Cautiously. I'm going to answer that. So we did have debate about this as directors. The approach is based on being open to looking at different ways to invest in regeneration projects. Traditionally, the combined authority either hasn't done that very much or has taken a very risk-averse approach. But in the context where the combined authority is the main funder, or because more government money is being channeled through the combined authority that previously would have gone through other routes, we need to have a risk appetite that is reflected, that reflects those of our partners as well as ourselves. And in the context of projects like Bradford City Village, where you're effectively looking to restart an urban economy, you need to have an open approach. Just having an open approach in terms of risk appetite doesn't mean that you'll automatically take risky decisions. It just means you're being prepared to look at the different range of finance and funding opportunities that there are. So in particular, that's looking at different ways of funding things, use of private sector capital, use of equity, use of those kinds of financial things that we haven't previously done. That's where it's coming from.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, just a question on the risk scores, I guess, or heat map. So are those risk scores, so like where we've got a very high one, say on security, is that an inherent score, and do we have a risk assessment on, presumably we've taken steps to reduce that risk? I'm just trying to understand where that appears. Sorry if I'm looking at the wrong papers.
In terms of the scoring, we will come back to some of that in the exempt item, but in terms of the scoring of it,
it's more generic to understand if that's just the inherent risk, because obviously there's significant risk around security or any legal challenge or whatever on any item. But then do we score it? What I'm getting at is, do we score it both inherently on the inherent risk of security as well as after we've taken controls to reduce that level of risk to the organisation?
Natalie?
The opinion, or sorry, not the opinion, the view is not to be looking at what the risk measurement would be after controls. It is following through in terms of the actions that have been, the risk that's been identified, the measures that have been applied to understand that risk, and how that can be ameliorated by any further controls to then manage that risk within limitations that would ensure that the decision could be made, but people were confident that they had taken a robust view of what the implications to that risk were and measured how they could control that through the duration of the project for which that was a risk attached to it.
Thank you. Any other questions on that? Yep.
I suppose what I'm getting at is that the right? I mean, maybe it was one of the previous stuff on the actual policy, but to me, you would need to. We need to understand. So you've got a risk on a particular item, which is inherent risk because it might be a legislative compliance requirement, for example, which if we're in breach of is significant to the authority. but we will have taken steps to reduce that risk. And I think it's important that we understand what the level of residual risk there is to the organisation, because that is dependent on what actions and controls we put in place. So what I'm getting at is that if we see something on here that's very high or whatever, what I'm assuming is that we've taken steps to mean that whilst that inherently is high, it shouldn't happen because we've got controls, and we need some way of being able to see both of those things, if that makes sense.
So in the risk register, it would include the measures that were being put in place to absolutely do what you're talking about, and there is regular reviews of risks to ensure that they are tracking as were as planned, and if they are deviating from that, what additional controls are being put in place to bring it back within the acceptable tolerance that you would expect for that risk.
Okay, thank you. David?
So just to that point, I thought one of the strengths of the material here is actually it seems to focus more on the risks after you put in place what we've currently put in place and assessing where that is, rather than going through the usual sort of two-step process of what would it be if we did nothing and then what is it now. So I think that's one of the strengths of this material. But I think it does focus on the thing we ought to be focusing on, which is where is it after we put in place those mitigations? Is that still enough is then the question. So I mean, I was quite comfortable that it had the right balance in there and focused on the right things.
Yes, Tim.
Can I just add, thank you, Chair, to your point, Councillor Homewood, that assessment is then reviewed as well regularly to see whether or not it still remains relevant, if that helps.
Thank you. Any other questions on the risk appetite statement? No? So do members approve the statement as it stands? Yes. Yes. Thank you. Okay, Appendix 5, that was a control evaluation effectiveness framework. Councillor Dacre.
I'm sorry, but could I ask that we just had a short break?
We can, yes, that's okay. Yeah. Yeah. If everyone's in agreement, we can just pause recording for 5 minutes. Lovely, thank you. Right, so we're now on to Appendix 5, the Control Evaluation Effectiveness Framework. Anything that members, that officer want to add about that? Anything? No? Okay, any questions? Question from Rob, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, it's just a comment. I think it just emphasises the importance of having this workshop where I think we can sort of see and feel how all these different elements of the risk management process are implemented, integrated, how they work, how they flow through the organisation. Because it's great, as David said, it looks fantastic on paper. There's no substitute for seeing it and feeling it and getting some feedback from directors who are key risk owners to see how it is actually practically working.
Yeah, I think the workshop's key, really, isn't it? But getting the content of the workshop right will also be key. So I don't know what the proposals are to develop, what that might look like.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with that point completely, and I think there's a co-collaboration piece on this in terms of committee members as well. So the broad content will be shared with members, and I would very much value members having their views in terms of any areas that they would like to include as well. We can do that outside of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pollard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just as an alternate on this committee, obviously I haven't got a full grasp of what's gone before, but just an idea on page 211, the assess control maturity level. I mean, of the effectiveness levels, can I be reasonably assured that we don't have any sort of operations of WICA which would certainly fall within score 1 as ad hoc, and I would hope that very, very few would have a score of 2 defined as initial, i.e. in place but informal, inconsistently applied or not well documented.
Thank you. Satinder, did you want to come back on that, or Natalie?
Sorry, I missed the last bit.
Did you want to repeat?
Yeah, it was just these control maturity levels. I would hope that we don't have any sort of functions of WICA which fall with a score level of 1, i.e. ad hoc. In other words, we haven't a clue what's going on really, and risk management is completely uncoordinated. And very few which would be defined as initial, i.e. controls in place but informal, which always seems a bit hazardous.
That might be something that's worth tracking through the dashboard, actually. I can't recall if it's on there, but Ben.
I think it's a good question, and I would certainly hope that we're talking 3 and above. I think the interesting thing is you can see some issues coming over the horizon, for example, in the devolution bill framework around the combined authority's competence area over things such as health and safety as separate categories, and you think, actually, we don't have any of those controls in place for how that would work. So actually, as we work with the government to understand what those accountabilities are like, making sure that the control processes are being built in, as well as alongside the standard ones that the combined authority already has, is pretty critical. So this is helpful in terms of thinking of, that could well be in the ad hoc space if we don't get this right.
Thank you. Any other questions on Appendix 5? No, so can I ask if members approve that? Yep, thank you, it's approved. Appendix 8 is the risk management training framework. So again, we're asked to approve that. Anything you want to add, Tinder? No? Nope.
None beyond,
Okay.
as I mentioned earlier.
Thank you. Questions from members? No. Do we approve then the framework as detailed in Appendix 8? Yeah, thank you. Appendix 9 is the Risk Management Procedure Suite. So any comments, questions on that? No? Okay, thank you. So does committee approve that? Yep, so that one's approved as well. Thank you. In more general terms, the committee is also being asked to approve the rollout and the embedding of the new risk management framework from autumn 2025. So I'm assuming, well, I shouldn't assume, I'm asking if the committee approve that they move ahead in rolling all of this out. Yeah, thank you. So that's approved too. The other thing before we move on to the risk register is that the cover paper I mentioned earlier at 1.3 details the documents that's being proposed to bring to each of these committee meetings. Has anybody got any comments, reflections on that, or are you content that we run with that and then see how it goes and adapt as necessary? Rob?
Thanks, Chair. I think that's probably something for the workshop as well, of just seeing how the risk management process can be how we can access it and what reports we actually need, rather than committing ourselves to receiving something at the moment. Just to look at that as part of that workshop.
Okay, there will be a timing thing then, won't there? Because we don't want to be left at the next committee without a suite of documents. I don't know have you any idea about proposed timeline?
That's been
Is it?
At the moment, I'll confirm that outside
Yeah.
this committee by
Okay, and then there'll be the other thing that whether there's time to change things before then as well. So in the interim, I think we need to agree.
That's fine.
Is that, yeah. So is everybody content and we agree that as a starting point and then we can adjust as we go. Lovely, thank you. Okay, so if we can then move on to the risk register and take any questions on the risk register except for anything that's going to appear in Appendix 7. David.
Not really a question, just to comment that I think the ropes to the risk on a page work very well, and the format, once it's fully populated and once it's fully up and running, will be really good.
Thank you. Did you want to talk us through any of the risks in terms of...
No, just to say that for committee members, this has arisen out of officer comments provided previously in relation to the Excel spreadsheet that was used. This is very much a work in progress, subject to, and from my perspective, needing to have committee members' comments, and there will be further iterative versions of this as well. So just to emphasise to members, this is not the final version.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions on the risk register before we move to the closed session? Yes, Councillor Dacre.
Sorry, so it might say somewhere, and I've lost it, but so when will the final version come to us? And there never will be a final version in some ways, will there? Because it will always have to be under review.
Just to be clear, in terms final version, in terms of not the risks that are reported, but the format. So this is the first time that this is being reported in this way. So would welcome committee members' comments in terms of the formatting, any areas you think that it's missing or could be highlighted. Because I've already had comments from senior colleagues, for example, in terms of the section in the top right hand of that page.
Homewood.
Yeah, I was just going to say apologies for my earlier question because I think this is what I was looking for, and I was probably like confused on which items on. But yeah, I think this is useful because what I was wanting to see is what our current risk rating is, what we're doing about it, what our target is, and that's what I was kind of talking about earlier without looking at the right item. So yeah, this is kind of what I think is a useful way of presenting it. Definitely, thank you.
Any other questions on that? Yes, Councillor Pollard.
Just a little bit of comment really on the capability and capacity constraints to capital programme delivery. That's a current risk rating of very high. There's a reasonable bit of narrative there, but at the moment lots and lots of capital programmes are struggling with capacity and capability, and do we think that has a significant knock-on effect to mass transport type stuff as well, really? Because a very high risk suggests to me that kind of things don't happen in a timely manner, usually.
Thank you. Who wants to take that? Ben?
Thank you. It's a good question. So I think specialist resourcing is always a challenge, and at the moment the key mitigation is that we're using specialist companies to provide that expertise. That's particularly the case for mass transit, which this risk isn't explicitly about, but it is. You've touched on it in your question, and the plan there is over time, as you would expect, where we see a ongoing need for a degree of specialism, to swap out the consultancy with internal recruitment. External recruitment. I think on the capital programme as a whole, I think we should take that away, Cindy, because I don't see that risk in quite the same way, in the sense that there are resourcing challenges within the sector, whether they are specific to the combined authority or not. Given that 2/3 of these projects are being delivered by other partners, I need to check.
So can you come back to us?
We'll come back with
one. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions? Councillor Dacre.
Yes, thank you. Just on the tendered and services and bus enhancements being withdrawn without notice, in the assurance on control, number 6 is to be confirmed. I just wondered.
Have you got the page number you're looking at, Councillor Dacre?
No, because it doesn't seem to have a page number on it.
Is it 227?
It doesn't have. I can't. Oh, there it is. I can't read it, but
I think it's 227.
221.
Yeah.
in my copy, 227 is incident management business recovery.
It's 221.
Is that, oh, sorry, is that not the one you were looking at?
No, it's the. I don't know whether the numbers are different, but it's.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
It's 221, yeah. Correct.
Yeah, the risk that commercial tendered services and bus enhancements will be withdrawn with little notice.
So I think, Councillor Dacre, what you're saying is so it is page 221 on the operator bus services risk. There's an existing control which is agreed allocation of 2.5 million in bus service improvement plan or BSIP funding, phase 4 for protection of services, and the assurance on that control is to be confirmed. Is that your question?
Yes.
Great. I'll need to come back to you because I'm not entirely sure of these. I thought that had been confirmed through the spending review, but it might be subject to a further process point by the Department for Transport. So we'll drop you a note back on that as well.
You'll just appreciate that that's one that's dear to our heart.
Completely understand. Yep.
Very high and increasing, but.
Thank you. Any other questions on the corporate risk register? No. I've got one observation. I would personally still welcome a helicopter view, sort of something that cuts across the silos, so I know what's happening as an organisation as opposed to individual elements of it, but we could touch on that maybe at the workshop.
Just to say, completely agreed, and I have in mind that overarching cover report with these as appendices, if that helps you, Chair.
Thank you. So if there's no other queries on that, if we'd move to closed session for Appendix 7. Yeah. Thank you. So agenda item 13, it's compliance and monitoring dashboard report. For new members of the committee, this is a standard agenda item and it was requested by the committee to provide us with a concise picture of the effectiveness of the internal controls and regulatory environment. What we're looking at here is a current dashboard, and you will see that in the next agenda item there's the proposed changes to that dashboard. So again, as with a lot of things that this committee looks like, it's something that's under continual review and revision based on how it works. There are some technical terms in this report, so if any of the members are unsure on anything, please do just ask. Satinder, anything you want to draw our attention to, or Natalie? I'm not sure. No? No, okay. Any questions on the dashboard and any of the detail within it? Rob?
On page 275 in the paragraph 3.6.7 about near misses, and obviously if a driver is using their mobile on the carriageway, that's obviously a prosecutable offence. We find the relevant operator, but do we know what the operator does with that driver? Because I think we probably want assurance that they no longer drive a public service vehicle if that's what they've been found to be doing.
Don't know who's coming back on that one.
Sorry, Chair, I raise it just as a point of that follow-up of seeing the implications of if we found something and then how does it get seen through from a CA point of view so that we get assurance that it's been properly dealt with.
So that's the question there then, is how are these followed through so this committee can gain assurance that appropriate action has been taken. You in a moment. So yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I can pick that up, please, if I can come back to the committee in terms of what is essentially being requested is application of our other policies and procedures, for example, HR matters.
Councillor Pollard.
Thank you, Chair. It's just really a little query on budgeting process, really. On page 277, under expenditure, item section 3.16, staff costs are favourable to the budgeted position by £5.8 million, primarily due to timing relating to recruitment, ongoing restructures and turnover. I'm also a member of the West Yorkshire Fire Authority, and it is a perennial thing on monitoring reports for expenditure that recruitment lag always results in an underspend, which suggests that the assumption as to the timing of recruitment lag is invariably very much on the safe side. I can only assume that the same thing applies with WICA. Is that regularly looked at in terms of the realistic budgeting in terms of recruitment process? I guess that's one for Kate, is it?
I think Kate's taking this one, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do. It is one of the assumptions that we look at every year. We do currently have built in an assumption around vacancy factor, which we look at every year just to look at trends. Obviously, it is a little bit, obviously it moves up and down, so there can be various factors involved in that. But yes, it is one that we look at in terms of that. But historically, I would say everywhere that I've ever worked has slightly undercooked. You're absolutely right, that piece. There is always, and you know, in the scope of the spend that we have on staff, it is our biggest expenditure base, so actually the variances can be quite significant for quite a small percentage.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Chair. It's just the use of the term favourable. Yes, it's an underspend on pay, but I'm not sure it's favourable because we intended to have a full establishment of staff and we've not done that. So actually it's an adverse operational implication. It might work well for budget monitoring and underspending, but from an operational point of view, it's not favourable as far as I would regard.
Do you want to come back on that one, Ben?
I think that, I mean, I agree. I agree. I think it's the whole sentence, though, isn't it? Favourable to the budgeted position. I think is the from an accountant's perspective. but the sentiment point is well made.
Yeah, Councillor Golden.
Can I ask for clarification as to where you get your data about complaints, casework and correspondence? And are you assured that it covers all of the inquiries that come to the Combined Authority? Because I think as an elected member, one of the frustrations that we have is that there isn't, as far as I can see, a formal customer engagement operation.
So forgive me, and this is an assumption on my part. So I would imagine that our corporate complaints procedure or team deal with those to include Rob Forrest's team as well. And I don't know, Natalie, if Natalie or Chris, you can help in terms of any further detail on that, please.
Yes, so thank you, Councillor. The information comes directly from the CRM system, which currently manages casework, complaints and correspondence. So everything that goes into the team which manages that level of correspondence is logged within that system, and those figures represent that.
So Councillor Gordon and I have discussed this issue in the past. Well, I think the issue that we're dealing with here is questions that come into the combined, not necessarily complaints, but casework that comes into the Combined Authority via officers or directors. The question really is, do they always find their way into the casework system? And that, I think, is something that we've asked a question about, making sure that that gets. I think what Councillor Gordon is asking for is assurance that it does. And we need to just check that through.
That is a very good point, because it does raise the question over quality of data, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So if we're looking at this data, we need assurance that the data is accurate and timely, etc. So, yeah, I think that's probably another challenge to think about, isn't it? How we get that assurance on that, and we're not looking at stuff that's way out of date or doesn't represent a true picture. Okay, thank you for that. I've got a couple of queries, if I may. One it is around the complaints. There's a continued increase in a number of complaints. So I was just wondering if there's any work being undertaken to understand the common themes, if there are any. And the other one was the inquiry meetings, and the number of inquiry meetings still seems to be high, which is a concern in terms of governance. So I was just wondering, again, what might be being done about that.
Can I come back on in court meetings? So it's really an observation that one of the things that the government has recently announced is looking again at having local government meetings held online. At the moment, we're not allowed to do that. We think that directly impacts on quality, matters particularly for the combined authority, given the distances that we draw members from. So I think if the government does institute that, that will be a major plus in terms of getting better quality.
Natalie.
And just to give reassurance that the committee services section are working extremely hard in establishing whether a committee is quorate by checking responses to meeting invites to committee meetings and ensuring that if people are unable to attend, that the substitute is lined up to attend the meeting. Hence, the quoracy rates have improved dramatically as a consequence.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Howard.
Just on the quiet of the meeting, I was just going to say, and I don't know how not a lot of experience here, but I did note that when there was a lot of discussion about meeting dates and stuff, there did seem to be a lack of looking across, particularly from a council's perspective, looking across the different authorities, that where there was potentially things like full council meetings at authorities, which in clashes, I don't know if there can be more done on that, because I think obviously it's not possible to make everything fit. But I think if you have, say, a full council meeting, you can't really have a combined authority meeting that day that you'd expect councillors to come to.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think Ben's going to come back on that.
Right. Natalie wants to.
I think the schedule of meetings when dealing with 5 constituent authorities is a bit of a nightmare, if I'm being frank about it. And we are looking at ways that we can deliver a timetable which works for the combined authority and for the constituent authorities that are sending members to the committee, because what we would like is that members are able to attend the meetings well prepared and able to participate in those meetings fully. And if they're subbing at short notice, which sometimes does happen in relation to your point, it does mean that members are kind of having to think on the hoof, and we would prefer that wasn't the case. So just to give reassurance that we are checking if there are other ways that we can arrange the date schedule that is better accommodating.
Thank you, Ben.
Just to build on that, so to save Natalie and Sarah's blushes, they do a lot of work to try and avoid council meetings, and I think that is resulting in the clashes that we're now seeing are more about other commitments that councillors have rather than the formal meeting. So it's progress, but there's still work to be done, as Natalie says. But ultimately, what we need to ensure is that the combined authorities meeting dates are sufficiently stable that councillors can also take those into account when making their diaries as well. There's a two-way street here. I'm just conscious, Debbie, that we didn't answer your question about themes in complaints and casework. So we do have. I mean, I'm just thinking, we when we see that internally, it is themed at least by subject area. So we could certainly provide that. We know what the majority of casework relates to, not necessarily what the topic is within that, but at a high level we can provide that if that's helpful.
I think it goes back to Councillor Dacre's earlier point that we don't want to get too into the detail, but we need assurance, I suppose, that these things are being looked at holistically.
Yeah, they definitely are.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions on this dashboard? No, thank you. So we'll move on to agenda item 14, which is a proposal for the revised monitoring dashboard. Members have been commenting on the effectiveness of the original dashboard for quite a few times. So this is a second iteration of it for comments. So has anybody got any comments about this? David?
Just a couple of ones. I think it's a better format. Firstly, on the first page, the current risk rating. I guess I'm less interested in the mix of current risk ratings and more interested in what's out of appetite. And So I think that's maybe what the focus should be there in terms of the reporting. And then secondly, I think last time round I asked a question about an ICO incident that was reported. A data security incident reported to the ICO, and then in the meantime I got information back on what that was. I think if we're going to report the incidents, you need to have, where there's an incident report of the ICO, just a brief explanation of what it is and what's been learned from it. Otherwise it just raises the question.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's something that we will include, because what we're aiming to achieve with this new iteration of the dashboard is that we provide both qualitative and quantitative information for you to be able to really get in depth into that information, as opposed to sort of seeing the numbers, if you like.
Thank you. Any other questions on this, or are members in agreement that this is introduced in autumn and again we see how it goes? Natalie?
Just briefly to say that what we would propose undertaking is that there would be a workshop prior to the first autumn meeting of the committee to enable the members of the committee to have a run through the dashboard and be able to utilise the additional features that it's got, rather than you having to do it real time in committee. So that would be what we would also like to get a sense of whether that would be agreeable, that we organised a short demo where Chris could walk people through what the new dashboard contained and how it was going to be supported by the narrative report, but also the ability to investigate certain elements of it to get that additional level of detail, but not the granularity, because I'm picking up the message that you really want to see the kind of by exception, what are the trends, those kinds of propositions to enable the committee to focus in on what is really the necessary activity.
Thank you. I'd support that introduction to it. Other committee members welcome that too. Yeah. So if we say yes to that. Rob, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just one thing to perhaps think about is, there's one thing about producing stats. It's the so what. What are the implications of poor compliance? What's at risk? What have risks increased because of this compliance? And some narrative, not for every single line obviously, but the ones that pose the most significance because of poor compliance. And it's hard to draw out the implications of that from the dashboard. It's all a bit sort of data driven rather than the so what, if that could be thought about.
So maybe the answer to that is just a covering note, pulling anything out of significance. I don't think it has to be too technical, does this? It's just, yeah. So maybe if you could take that away and just give that a bit of thought. Thank you. Okay, so we're in agreement that we try and introduce this in autumn, and we'll have the workshop beforehand to introduce as to how it's going to work, so that we can challenge effectively at that next meeting. Is that okay with everybody? Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 15, that's a draft statement of accounts. Kate, are you leading us through this one?
Thank you, Chair. So you have the draft statement of accounts for 24-25 presented to you. They are draft, as the report says, because they are subject to audit, and they are currently out at public inspection as well for those. So the statement of accounts themselves comprise of the primary statements and notes, also the annual governance statement, which, just to note, was approved by the Combined Authority Board yesterday for that. These will come back to you early in 2026 as a final set, accompanied by the external auditor opinion, as we've just discussed in there, and the accounts will remain open until that point for assessment of post-balance sheet events. Just to note, the accounts were not published by the 30th of June deadline. In there, we did duly issue a delay statement, and that was in conversation with Ms. Ars and with Alistair around that. That was due to issues in the movement in reserve statement for there. You will see within the accounts there is a statement of responsibilities which I am required to sign to certify that these accounts give a true and fair view. I cannot let those accounts go out and sign that statement until I am assured of that, and those issues within that statement didn't allow me to issue that at the 30th of June deadline. We have since reconciled all of those in there and issued the accounts, as I say, so they are now out there. In terms of talked around some of the issues, and some of you have been on committee will be aware of the wider kind of journey around accounts in previous years. So while we are extremely disappointed that we kind of missed that deadline, actually this is a significant improvement from where we have been in previous years within there. We are continuing to review the process. We are talking with Bron around a piece of advisory work actually to help us in there, and looking at further enhancement. The only other thing I would ask to note is just that the accounts, you will see two sets of figures in there. There is the single entity WICA, which is effectively everything that happens in this building, piece in there. And then there is the WICA group, which effectively consolidates the police numbers in there and adds those together to create the group accounts, as they shall be, within there, which includes both the police and the National Police Air Service as well. So West Yorkshire Police host those. So because of that, we also contain the assets for that service of helicopters, etc. on our balance sheet.
Thanks, Kate. So I think the committee took quite a deep dive, didn't we, into why the accounts were late, and received assurances around changes to process which should avoid that happening again. So we covered that over the last couple of meetings. So I think we got to a point where we were comfortable that next year should be on time. So yeah, any questions on that? Councillor Pollard.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I must apologise for being merely an alternate on this, so I'm not entirely clear as to the who does what bit. But in terms of the police fund, it may not be a question that can be answered here. On page 11, I know that the net cost of police services in terms of expenditure was an underspend in excess of £10 million, and there is mention on page 306. Net outturn position has been contributed mainly from savings arising from staff vacancies. So is it the case that the recruitment drive, much advertised, is stalling a bit?
Okay, Kate.
I could get that for you in terms of, and just for full transparency, I only took post on the 19th of May, so my historical knowledge of 24-25 is somewhat perhaps lacking in there in search of that. So we could certainly get that information for you from the police. Obviously those are the police's numbers in there, and that's, yeah, that information, but as well.
Thank you. So if we could just come back on that, and we'll answer your question. Rob?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of comments on the annual governance statement within the accounts. Just to clarify, I think it was said that the AGS has been agreed at full authority, but this committee has got within its terms of reference approval of the statement of accounts. I'd have perhaps thought that we would have the opportunity to comment on the draft AGS and the final, or the proposed final one, before it went to full authority, because, as I say, we might have a view on the accuracy and of the AGS. And with that in mind, on page 328 of the pack, where it identifies significant governance issues, I don't recognise some of those as having come through the Governance and Audit Committee. So if we'd had a problem about White Rose, and I was on the train past it this morning, if that is a governance issue, what were those governance issues, and should we not have been cited on those, given that we are a Governance and Audit Committee, and that might flow to other aspects of what is deemed significant governance issues. Hence why I make the point of us seeing the draft and having the opportunity to sort of comment on it and correlate between things we've seen and what officers have deemed as significant governance issues.
Thank you. Who wants to take that one?
So, and Kate will back me up on this as well. So it's a really good point. Thank you. But just to reassure this committee, absolutely your terms of reference require approval of the annual governance statement. What happens during the municipal year is that it travels through to combined authority in draft form. it is not in final form yet. It will come before this committee later on this calendar year to pick up those points that have been referred to earlier, if that helps members of the committee.
I seem to think we saw it last year, didn't we? And I think it is on our schedule of business, isn't it? So it's maybe a timing thing.
We can certainly take that away, and I just have a look around the timing. I think it is a fair point. Satinder is correct, though, that in the same way that the accounts stay open, in theory, the annual governance statement. So if there was something that came to light that later, before the accounts and the annual GS have finally been signed off, that are kind of is in relation to 24-25, we would have to make consideration of whether we need to review that. In terms of, I know they've raised around certain items. Certainly White Rose went to Combined Authority Board and has been through their in there.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, when there's an issue with the project along the lines of the White Rose project, is this committee one that would expect to be informed of those project-specific issues? And because I think we're flagging it in the annual governance statement because it has been an issue over the course of the year, and it has been picked up by the Combined Authority and by the relevant members and officers. I suppose what I'm trying to ask, Rob, is what's the nature of what you want at this committee so that we can make sure we provide it?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ben. It was a good example that if it's been regarded as a governance issue, something in the CA's governance has gone wrong that led to this issue, if that's the case, then clearly with our oversight of the governance of the CA, just to understand what aspect of contract management, whatever it was, that failed, not the detail obviously, and obviously there's a timing issue, but for it to be regarded as a significant governance issue warranting inclusion in the AGS, it just felt this was the first time we were hearing about it as a governance committee, and it's just our input to understand why it was a significant governance issue, and therefore what bit of governance allowed it to happen or didn't work properly, what we're doing about it, so we get assurance that it's not going to happen again.
So I think in my mind, I quite agree, but I think the route I would see that taking is that you would expect some sort of audit work to be done if it failed, and for us to see that and the outcome of that, because that would then show that the governance system is working, because you wouldn't, I mean it may be flagged at one committee, but there'd be an action as a result of it, wouldn't there?
Yes. I'm looking at my colleagues because I think I don't see the reason that it's here probably isn't a failure of governance. That's probably what's going on here. But I suspect there is a nature of colleagues to be transparent about big issues that have been bubbling up, and it's so it probably would have felt wrong not to mention it. But equally, I don't think it's actually a governance issue that's taken this to the point, at least not entirely.
And I couldn't read reading that bit. I couldn't pick out that it was a significant governance issue, which is why why was it there, and if it was there, why we hadn't been made aware of it, sort of thing.
Yes, Councillor Pollard.
Again on page 328, and this is something which may have been discussed in this committee before, because it relates to statement of accounts for 23-24. The consolidation issue arising in producing group accounts for the Combined Authority and the West Yorkshire Police. I'm not a trained accountant, so I literally don't know what this means in terms of transfers of what between which account, and if you could just give us a little bit of narrative on what the issue was there, and whether or not it was a material amount or whether it was just a minor oversight.
Kate's going to come back on that one.
It was material. I believe it was brought through this committee as well, in terms of effectively there was a double count of the police expenditure, and that was brought through this committee and disclosed. Clearly we have put in a significant amount of quality assurance processes as part of this year's process in there. So I am absolutely comfortable that has not happened this year for it.
But, Councillor Pollard, it was material, but it was an accounting treatment. There were no real actual impacts on services.
Okay, Councillor Dacre.
Yes, and on that point, it was covered in that training that we were given over a week ago, where they explained how it all come about. I know. Oh, right, okay. Yeah, so...
I mean, I'm sure we can come back to you outside this committee if you want a bit more detail on what it was and how it was resolved. We could certainly do it. It is minuted, though, as well from previous meetings. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
But the actual point that I'd intended to make was about the asset management approach and Bradford interchange. And my understanding is that a lot of that has gone through the Transport Committee, but it's a bit like the White Rose in that I think it would be helpful if it isn't necessary for us to see it, to have seen it at the time. It would be helpful in those two, in cases like White Rose and asset management, for there to just be a comment as to why it's something that hasn't maybe come to us during the year because it's being dealt with in another way, instead of us ending up asking why on earth are we suddenly finding out about this now.
Ben?
I think it's a similar answer to White Rose. What I'm struggling with is the closure of Bradford Interchange was due to in effect of the condition that the building found itself in. Was it a failure of governance is the question, but and hence what's the role of this committee is as a new to this committee is the bit that I'm struggling with. But I think what you're saying as committee members is we probably need a mechanism as things are arising over the course of the year that could have a bearing on G&A's interests, that you're made aware of them so that you know what's going on, just in case you think, actually, can you explain about what the governance or the risks or the controls relationships are here? Is that
well, actually, I wasn't even saying that. I was just saying that if it did end up coming into the governance statement like this, just a further sentence explaining why it had never come before would perhaps be enough. But it might be more appropriate to note it at the time.
I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah.
I think it needs noting, but we also need assurance that anything that reflects a breakdown in governance is made known to this committee. Yeah, thank you. Any other comments on that, David?
Just while we're on the governance statement and the statement to the significant governance issues, I think the statement of accounts 23-24 notes that double counting. It doesn't say anything about the accounts being published late the year before, nor that was then a contributing factor in them being unaudited and then a disclaimer opinion on them. I think that's all governance issues relating to the process that we ought to be, I think, a little bit more clear about. Plus, there's no commentary in here about the number and degree of audit points that are still open, and therefore in the plan going forward I'd expect to see something about a commitment to clearing those audit points in a timely manner going forward as well. And so just for complete sort of openness and transparency about what issues we've had and what we're still dealing with in terms of audit points, I'd expect those issues to be raised in that section.
Thank you. So can I just take that away and just reflect on that? Natalie?
Not to respond to the immediate question, is just to reassure the committee that the annual governance statement did come to the May meeting of this committee.
We have seen it before. So we did have opportunity to comment on it then. I don't know if there is opportunity to change it now, or if we just have to go with it and sort of reflect on that for next year. Yeah, you have to take it away and give it some thought. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so if there are no further questions, then we will move on to item 16. We have got 10 minutes left to conclude the rest of this meeting, Kate. So if there is anything, I think it's for notes only, isn't it? The draft regulations at this stage.
They are for noting, and they will then go on to, so it is an opportunity for you to comment, and then they will go onwards to Combined Authority Board, where they will be approved because they are part of our constitution effectively, so that is why Combined Authority has
to approve them.
Thank you. So any comments on the document? No? Okay, thank you. So if it can be noted, the committee's considered the regulations. That takes us on to agenda item 17, which is an update to the whistleblowing policy. Again, Kate, is this you? No, Brom? Okay.
So I'm back again. So effectively, the whistleblowing policy, it's not just a review and a minor update. We had quite a lot of learning out of experience of dealing with a number of whistleblowing complaints that led us to do a major revision of the policy. We did, in doing that, we've consulted a lot internally. We've done full DPIAs and, data protection impact assessments, quality impact assessments. We've also taken it out for some external consultation with some organisations that we use for doing investigations to see whether we are hitting the mark now. And what we have is a policy that is very much in line with PIDA, with the public disclosure legislation. It is also, hopefully, gives a lot of clarity around what does and does not constitute whistleblowing and what should go through other policies and procedures in place in the combined authority as appropriate. What we do have, though, this has been seen by our performance board and approved by our performance board subject to some amendments. Given that we have made a few amendments, one of which was to put in the process map, we are open to comments from this committee. If there is anything you feel it is missing or it would benefit from having, there is an opportunity for us to take it back to performance board with those amendments. So it's not a done deal at this point. I know it says for noting and comment, but I would like to know if there is anything that we could do to enhance this policy further. So open to any comments or questions. Rob?
Thanks, Chair. The one thing on the section regulatory and compliance, in terms of the reference to the Public Interest Disclosure Act, I've seen in many whistleblowing policies reference to the Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Act, which changed the requirements to make sure that any whistleblowing was in the public interest, and whether that's a statutory sort of reference that ought to be included. The other thing which I think might be worth thinking about is an FAQs annex, again, that enables staff who need to understand, it just helps them appreciate what what constitutes a proper whistleblowing referral, how it will be dealt with, perhaps a few scenarios of what is and what isn't. As I say, it just potentially helps staff understand it properly. I just say that because I was a whistleblowing officer where I used to work, so live and breathe this stuff. The other thing I didn't actually notice, and I'm just skimming through it again, was contact details for how somebody actually made a referral and assurances that in doing that it was a secure means. I just had a separate bat phone, as it were, on my desk for referrals, a separate email, separate number, voicemail, 24-hour voicemail to enable that breadth and range of referrals, but I couldn't actually see anything in here that said how anybody would contact you.
So it is in the document under section 6.1, the disclosure process. It names me, it's my number, my email address.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Did you want to
Yeah,
come up
just
quickly?
again, not to be too picky, and obviously internal audit colleagues should be trusted partners, but if somebody is contacting, you know, making use of this scheme and want to talk to you personally, I would have expected it not to be operated by the internal audit team, unless that's just the way you've described it. It's only you that has access to that.
So no, so it currently can be picked up by the team. They have been trained and they have a set of
Okay.
I think to take questions after
Yep.
as well. if
Yep,
you want to
that's
come
fine.
back to me directly, I'm very happy to do that.
Thank you. Any other questions on that? No. Okay, thank you. So if we move on to our final agenda item, which is item 18, and that's the revised Officer Code of Conduct. Is that Stinder? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Not a huge amount to say in addition to the content of the report, but just to highlight some primary changes or substantive changes that have been made. Those include the requirement for officers to make annual declarations of any interests they have to the organisation, and the updating is in relation to language and also taking into account best practice.
Thank you. Any queries on that? No, thank you. So if we can note that the committee has received that report. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of this meeting. The next meeting is 24th of October. I'm aware that there are a number of actions and matters that various officers are going to come back to the committee on, so it'd be useful just to make sure we're really clear at the start of the next meeting that those have been covered off, that we've got a record of what they were and that they've been addressed. Okay, thank you very much.